Soil health has been the big topic of the day for a while now. Everybody has been very excited about soil health in the USDA, NRCS, research grants, researchers, farmers are talking about soil health, testing to see whether they have good soil health or not, and being very excited. And it has significant promise to benefit production and the environmental goals. But the main thing I wanted to talk about today is how soil health has significant importance, not just as an indicator or for someone to brag about that their soil health is lovely, but it has to have an end goal. And our end goal has to be thinking about what does the soil do for us when we are growing crops and food and feed for animals as well. So soil serves 5 essential functions. We can start with regulating water. Soil helps control where the rain and snow melt and irrigation water goes. And water and dissolved solutes flow over the land or into and through the soil. And a healthy soil will do that well and help more water come into the soil so that it's available for plants, and also will make sure that that water running off doesn't take soil with it. Another function of soil is that it sustains plant and animal life by providing nutrients for the crops, for plants, and that can then grow, and the animals that eat those plants. Soil, good healthy soil promotes diversity and productivity of living things that all depend on the soil, which is one reason why my very first soil science class in university was so exciting, because I felt like it was the basis of all of agriculture. Soil also filters and buffers potential pollutants. So the minerals and microbes in the soil will filter, buffer, break down, immobilize, detoxify various materials that get added, including things that are natural and things that might not be so natural. So can serve significant purpose in that. And we know that from things like we'll have what you put onto the soil, then by the time the say, for example, sewage goes through the soil, by the time it gets down to the water table, it's been nicely filtered out and you generally have drinkable water again. Soil also serves to cycle nutrients, and carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and other nutrients are stored and transformed and cycled in and through the soil, so that those nutrients are then available for plants when they need it. And soil provides physical stability and structure, place for the roots to grab hold and to stay anchored, for plants to be anchored in the soil. And we also think about, even engineers pay attention to soil because of the structures for our houses and other buildings itself. And people were experiencing that with their topsoil blowing away and not being able to grow crops. And so that was the beginning of the Soil Conservation Service in this country, and some beginning awareness in other places as well about soil quality, which is what we used to call soil health. We used to call it soil quality. And then as we became more aware of the importance of the biology in soil quality, the term soil health became much more common and more popular. And so really, as soil scientists, we've been talking about soil quality, being able to grow crops well for a long time. But now mostly we talk about it as soil health, which includes all of those other things in soil quality before too. In the soil, aggregates are the bits of soil that are glommed together, and those soil aggregates are homes for microbes. They can keep organic matter kind of secure within the aggregates. And by the fact that they glom together, they're resistant to being eroded by wind and water. And so soil aggregates are an important component of soil health. They are bound together by organic material, by exudates from roots, by microbial exudates as well, and things that the earthworms and other organic other microbes and other animals in the soil too. The soil organic matter is an important component of soil health as well, and that soil organic matter contains carbon. It also holds on to nutrients, and it holds water in the soil as well. The more organic matter in the soil means that you have more capacity to hold water in the soil as well. Nutrient cycling is an important component of soil health. When we have the nutrients are held in the organic matter or in the plant roots or in the microbes, rather than being loose and in mineral form, then we end up with fewer losses, and they can then become available again when the plants need them. So if we have good nutrient cycling going on, tighter nutrient cycling because of healthier soils, we have more of those nutrients available for the crops when they need them, and less of them being lost in the environment. And water and soil health also provides significant water infiltration capability and helps the water to be available. So we have a number of different soil health principles from the USDA NRCS, and these have to do with how we manage to have soil healthy soils. And these include maximizing continuous living roots, and that's where things like cover crops and other non-crop plants come into play. When we don't have our main crop, we try to do something else to have living roots, so that those living roots have exudates that then are available for the microbes to have food, and also the roots, when they die, they provide conduits for water to come into the soil. The plants also providing a mulch that then can prevent water damage and help water to come nicely into the soil instead of running off and taking the soil with it. Minimizing disturbance of the soil is also another principle, and that is less tillage than what was traditional. Maximizing the soil cover, and that is all part of these other ones as well, but it's another principle that gets talked about. They're all related to each other. And maximizing biodiversity in terms of total plant species, but also some livestock integration. So these principles are also seen when we look at conservation agriculture as a term used more globally by the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They talk about conservation agriculture in much the same way as we talk about soil health, in terms of minimizing the soil disturbance, so we can use no-till or other ways to seed and apply fertilizer, having a permanent soil organic cover with either crop residues or cover crops or both, and diversifying species through different crop sequences, as well as crops, maybe even multiple species in a cover crop, and also some integration of livestock. So we can see that this ideas of conservation agriculture and soil health are really much the same thing, and so they're quite related to each other, and we can talk, when we hear the terms, we can think about them as being very similar. If we think about these different principles of soil health, then the practices end up being primarily things that involve reduced tillage compared to conventional practice, and also cover crops. And that's how it ends up turning out in in the US, we have about 26% of all farmland in the US is under no-till, and approximately only 4% of farmland in the US under cover crops. I think those numbers, especially the cover crop ones, are higher in some places like North Carolina, and especially on smaller farms. And we see that that cover crops are more common in places like Maryland, which has had some significant payments for cover crops in order to, and that was for water quality purposes. So soil health scores, I'm just going to talk about, we have the indicators of soil health. Often you can collect your soil sample and get and find these are indicators, and they are not necessarily the results, but they should be connected. These tests would then be related outcome, would be related to the productivity as well as to the environmental outcomes. So that if we did have a soil that has a higher soil health score on all the different parameters that they measure in the lab when you've sent your soil in for being tested, then the goal would be that that soil health score would also be related to having higher yields or more stable yields of your crops, or also having better productivity overall, maybe reduced costs of your inputs, and also improved water quality, better air quality, and some climate benefits. So these indicators are helpful if change is possible and if they're actionable. And I just wanted to give one example of where maybe some of these indicators may not always have been helpful. This is just an example from some research done in North Carolina, where the researchers from NC State University were looking at the soil health tests that were designed for New York soils. And they took some soil samples from a test site in the Piedmont near here, where they had been doing 34 years of different tillage treatments. And they thought, well, we've got some of these have had more tillage and others have had less tillage. And there certainly were there was some variability in terms of a soil health score after they sent these to the lab. And most of these soils ended up having a low soil health score compared to soils in New York. And so the question was how well this talked about health. Is a healthy soil in New York really valid to compare to a soil in North Carolina, was one of the questions. But then when they looked at the yield of corn on those plots in that trial in 1 year, there was very little relationship between the soil health scores of those plots and the yield of the corn in this one example. And so the researchers here were feeling kind of disappointed in the soil health tests that were there, and they were testing a number of different parameters and putting them all together to be one score. So I guess the take-home message of this experiment, this paper, was that if we have a test that we do and it tells us, we have a certain score, but it's not related to the outcome, it's not going to be as valuable as if we actually have a test that is related to our desired outcome. And so we want to think about when we are testing our soil to see if it's healthy or not, we want to think about how does that relate to our end goal. Although we do know from other research that certainly soil organic matter is important for both yield overall as well as stability. And so some other research done by one of my colleagues before she joined EDF was taking studies from all over the world and looking at soil organic carbon concentrations. So we go from 0% soil organic carbon on the left side here, and then all along to the right, we have higher and higher soil organic carbon concentrations, all the way up to over 3% soil organic carbon per hectare, which is at 7 to 10, somewhat similar to what we would get in the United States for a good producing crop. Best producing ones would be also. So we can see 0 and 2% soil organic in general as we follow this line here of this was the higher fertilizer rates. We do see that as we have higher soil organic carbon, we tend to end up with better yields because these are healthier soils that are holding on to water better, that are providing more nutrients overall for the crop. And so soil organic carbon as an indicator of soil health generally does a pretty good job of saying, yeah, when we have higher soil organic carbon, we have more productive soils, and so then it's probably a healthier soil as well. However, the question is then how does this relate to from one place to another, or even if you're just looking at your own soil, can you move along this line on one field in order to achieve better results? So the advantages of better soil health are that we end up with more carbon in the surface soil. It holds on to the nutrients. And some of the soil health practices themselves have advantages as well, in that cover crop roots can reach down further and bring nutrients toward the surface. And then by not being harvested, those nutrients stay in that surface soil and then are more available for the crops. And also more water storage, which I've mentioned a number of times, and some drought resilience as well being a benefit for soil health. So the question is that are these advantages of better soil health simply related to where you ended up having to farm or where you ended up being able to farm? So we can think about that, say, soils in Iowa have far greater organic matter than soils in North Carolina. So in order to get a healthier soil, do we have to move to Iowa or move to New York, where we see that they had a higher soil health score? And the question is how much can be done in our own soil that we have in our own fields here in North Carolina? So our goals for the long game, we're thinking about the long-term objectives here, is that we want productive crops. We want to have soils that help us to improve crop yields, have the highest possible crop yields, to be able to reduce our input uses, and stabilize profit margins by having more resilience to drought or floods and other things. And also other ecosystem services besides the production, the provisioning ecosystem service. And those include improving water and air quality and maintaining biodiversity and regulating climate. And that includes reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as possibly keeping the carbon that's in the soil there, as well as possibly increasing the soil organic carbon content, which would draw some additional carbon dioxide out of the air. So I'm going to give a few examples of some of the benefits for productive crops and reducing input uses and stabilizing profit margins, and then talk about some of the benefits that are both for production and the environment, and then some of the ones that are just basically advantages for the environment that don't also accrue to the farmers themselves. So we'll start with some of the benefits to agriculture, to the farmers themselves. So these are, oops. This is results from a survey that is conducted annually across the country by SARE and the Conservation Tillage Center. They do a national cover crop survey, and they looked at the 2015 and 2016 growing season. And these were different, all of these were farmers 500 farmers each year who had some fields that had cover crops and some fields that did not have a cover crop. And so they reported, these farmers self-reported their yield of both corn and soybeans for their field that had cover crops and for their field that did not have cover crops. And of those farmers, the ones that had been using cover crops for 1 year, the corn yield increased by about 0.5%. And the soybean yields after 1 year of cover crops were about 2% higher. For the farmers that had been using cover crops for 3 years, their corn yields were greater in the field that had crops by almost 2%, and soybeans were about 3 yield when they used cover crops. And as you can see, either farmers learned how to use cover crops better, and so they figured out how to avoid any yield penalties related to cover crops, or the field just really started figuring things out and continuing to increase in productivity, in that when they were using cover crops for 5 years, the corn yield benefit was about 3% and the soybean yield benefit was almost 5%. So these yield benefits were quite significant for these people, and making some people quite excited. The other thing to note is that in this same cover crop survey, in a drought year, we had much greater response of yield to cover crops. And so that's showing that this increase in organic matter in the surface soil, that the increase in biological activity is doing something to keep water available. More organic material is keeping the water in the soil. And so in 2012, when it was a drought year, this same group of farmers, who each of them had some fields with and without cover crops, they experienced soybeans in a drought. So that's a significant are also doing other soil health practices, but this is the impact of just cover crops. Again, a little bit more of cover crops, and a number of have started to do some case studies in economics, and overall costs that farmers are 24 per acre if they're using for cover crops. The combination costs that either spraying or crimping, rolling, possibly some tillage, that additional costs there. But then when the cover crop leads and bring more nutrients up, that these farmers are bringing significant savings in input costs. Fertilizer savings, some farmers reporting between $50 and $70 an acre savings. They have to use as much, especially, but also phosphorus and potassium and some other, and some erosion repair savings that are around $1 an acre. So overall, they were reporting that the after a few years of also, we think about these are some benefits that to both production and environment, reducing soil erosion. No-till or mulch, we would be less likely to see like we see in this picture. This is a cost to both the producer and to downstream, where we don't want to have all of that soil ending up in the rivers or in the Gulf of Mexico and other coastal areas. So that's a benefit of improved soil health practices, as well as improved soil health, where if we have better aggregation of the soil, it's less likely to be eroding as well. And then reduced tillage, well, that's beneficial for the farmer in terms of but also means fewer greenhouse gas emissions. And there was one farmer who reported on economic studies, reported that he was saving about $50 an acre just in fuel use by cutting fuel use by 60%. So that was significant savings, also less wear and tear on his tractors, and possibly not even needing some of the bigger tractors that you would otherwise need for doing the significant amount of tilling. So these benefits, and then of course there's some benefits both accruing to farmers and to the environment when we think about nutrients. And if we think about fertilizer, whether it's commercial fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer, or organic fertilizer, we want that fertilizer to end up in the food supply chain going to food rather than being lost to the environment. And if these nutrients go where we want them to go, that's also a benefit both for production and for the environment. So this is a figure that was in our first not have as much value directly, include downstream water quality. Know that cover crops have there's significant more cover crops in places like the Corn Belt. We would be able to get a long ways toward meeting some cost reduction in those regions. And if we think about those nutrient losses, with all the red circles and the black circles reported in coastal areas. So these are all places where nutrients coming from the land have ended up in the coastal ecosystems, grow very quickly, and then they die, and then there's not enough oxygen once they start to decompose, and the ocean life can't stay living in that area. So that's what these dead zones are, and they are mostly caused by large amounts of nitrogen coming out, and a little bit, and also some phosphorus, but primarily nitrogen in these systems. And so by reducing our nutrient losses from agriculture, we can have an impact by and hopefully have a few less of these dead zones and maybe make them a little bit smaller. Other environmental benefits, so I covered the downstream water quality. We also think about flood mitigation. If we have more water infiltrating into the soil and being stored in the agricultural land, we can have less runoff and end up with less flood water, or at least slowing it down. And the other environmental benefit that that may not be a benefit directly seen by the farmers, even although the carbon in the soil has other uses, but carbon sequestration, in that if we take more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, it can contribute to climate change mitigation and a stable climate. So how can you make soil health work for you on your own farm? Design your own experiments and think about setting aside a small part of the farm to have some cover crops that are different than what you might have used before, or a new cover crop or something different for tillage to reduce tillage, and see how it works, and rather than converting everything all at once if it's a little bit scary to do. Think about conducting soil tests for things that you could change. So look at things like mineralizable nitrogen and soil organic carbon, as well as other places that you might be able to find amendments that would be able to improve your pH or nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And so soil tests can be very helpful, especially if you can compare in your experiments how well they did in terms of affecting soil health. And there are lots of different programs available through the NRCS and the soil and water quality conservation districts and things like that. So some of those programs might be available to help share some of the costs, seed costs and things like that. And then the other thing to think about is that even when you're doing things like reducing tillage and using cover crops, you still need to think about managing nutrients carefully, because that will actually have an impact on the carbon composition of the soil. And so using the just right amounts, we talk about the Goldilocks, just right nutrient additions. If we add nitrogen to the system, this is from some research from Iowa, and they looked at a number of different systems where, if we look at this line, the solid line here is, say, a yield response to a total amount of nitrogen. So we can have, as we add nitrogen fertilizer or manure or compost, we increase the yield up to a certain point, this being the agronomically optimum nitrogen rate, being this line right here. And at that point, yield doesn't increase anymore, or sometimes it even goes down. This is the change in yield per unit of nitrogen input. So that's basically just this line. So we can ignore this dotted line. Soil inorganic nitrogen, really, once the crop has had enough nitrogen for its use, all of that additional nitrogen being added just becomes inorganic nitrogen in the soil, and then is at risk of being lost to the environment, and also causes some other problems in that if we have excess mineral nitrogen, it will speed up the microbial decay of the carbon residue, the high carbon residue, and we can end up with lower soil carbon in the end. So keeping nitrogen additions to the optimum is important in terms of maximizing soil organic carbon. So that was an interesting paper that came out a few years ago. So in conclusion, soil health is very valuable when it provides production and environmental benefits. And that's actually been the definition of soil health, that to say that it's actually healthier soil, it has to provide those production and environmental benefits. The indicators, like soil health tests, are a means to that end and not a goal themselves. So, and with that, I would just like to say thank you for being here, and I'll take any questions that you may have.
Yes, everyone, feel free to unmute yourself and say that, or if you are feeling a little shy or maybe in the middle of eating dinner, you certainly can also just place that in the chat, and we'll all be able to see that as well. So I really like that last study that you showed. That's super interesting, especially the part where it actually and it makes sense, is that it encourages more of the microbes to even go through the organic matter faster. So therefore, especially in the South where we have this trouble building organic matter in our soils anyway, it's kind of like working against that goal.
Yeah, adding too much nitrogen is not going to help,
Yeah, yeah.
even though we do need nitrogen
Yep.
to grow. So it's that
Yep.
finding the happy medium.
Yeah, good, little is good and too much of a good thing is not good, right?
No.
So are there any questions? You must have covered it all very, very well. So
Or it's so boring, everybody went to sleep.
no. It was really interesting and certainly nice to see the how that take home message of like, it takes a little while. You know,
Right.
so many people want instant gratification, try it once and they go, well, I heard from this guy, you got like these huge increases. So they try it. They don't realize, they don't see that year and they get discouraged and not understand it's a long game.
Well, and that's the way it goes with agriculture in general. I mean, I remember some of the first research that I was involved in. We were looking at rice systems in California, and whether they should, and they were transitioning away from burning the straw to keeping it on the ground. And for the first few years, there was really not much of an impact on nutrient supply. And by 5 years, after 5 years of incorporating the straw instead of burning it, they ended up with 40 pounds per acre of more nitrogen being available from that soil carbon having increased but it took 5 years before it was available to the crop.
Wow.
Matt has a question and I saw a chat and something in the chat.
Yeah, I have, this is Matt Colligan here. I just started with Extension and the New Hanover Soil and Water Conservation District this year. And we have other supervisors interested in looking to research that suggests adding organic matter to your soil will reduce flooding and has the ability to retain water. And we'd like to see that research so we could lobby to get that as an approved practice for CCAP funding, the Community Conservation Assistance Program that gives you money to build cisterns and pervious pavement and things like that. We'd like to see if there was actual research that pointed to that. And I didn't know if you had any article suggestions or where we might look for that kind of information.
We've been trying to find that as well. There is some indication of that, but a lot of the work that has been done is on a very small scale. And so we see like small runoff plot studies and they're like, oh yeah, look, see, it did reduce runoff. And then when they expand it to a whole watershed, it takes a long time to get any measurements. And there's like, someone says, well, it didn't actually make a big difference. And so there just really isn't much research, and the research that's out there has been on not the right size storms, and not in the watershed that people are interested in looking at. And so there is some indication. We expect that there will be that benefit, but there's very little research to actually prove it. So I've been still looking for that evidence. Figuring out exactly how much of a difference it's going to make. We know it makes a difference in that there is more water being stored in the fields because the crops have 5 extra days of water available in a drought in some of these places. But how much does that actually mean in terms of flooding? Yeah, it's going to reduce the peak level some. It might, if we've got a massive storm, it might not have as much of an impact. So it should have some impact, but we will also need other things out there as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And even numbers like that, yeah, adding, like 5 extra days against drought, that's useful information too. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. I see a question from Peter Gilmer about the movie Kiss the Ground suggests that carbon sequestration is the major key to reversing climate change. And I would say that's not quite realistic. In some cases, it seems like it's a way to, we don't want that to be an excuse for continuing to emit other greenhouse gases because, oh, carbon could be stored in the soil, so we don't have to do anything else. The few things to remember is that only some soils have the capacity to store more carbon, because if we think about really well-managed pastures, for example, there's not a whole lot more capacity to add more carbon to those pastures. And even if you are storing more carbon in a soil in a field, at some point it gets, like after 20 or 30 years, it won't be able to continue to do that. So we can build up to a certain amount and then it gets to a new equilibrium and it's not going to be able to add a whole lot more. So carbon sequestration in agricultural soils has some promise to be able to be helpful, but we also need to do all those other things to reduce emissions, to find other ways to capture carbon dioxide from the air, and the uncertainty of soil carbon sequestration is there such that we also have to just, we're not sure that some of the potential has been overhyped. So there is potential, but it's not the major key to reversing climate change. The other thing with carbon sequestration is that it could be reversed. And so we could store carbon in the soil and then somebody 20 years from now could till it up and it would go back into the atmosphere. So there's the reversals issues. There are questions of, were people already doing that? So if I have money to invest in climate change mitigation, and I pay somebody to grow cover crops, but they were already growing cover crops, then I'm actually not getting any new climate change mitigation out of that. So that's another question that is sometimes part of the problem. So it has some benefits, and it certainly has soil health benefits in terms of improving productivity, water quality, and things like that. It's we just maybe shouldn't count on carbon sequestration for solving all of our climate change problems.
Yeah, because there's that like nitrous oxide that's more polluting and methane that's more polluting, right?
Yes, so nitrous oxide is a big greenhouse gas from agriculture. That sweet spot, we can also net nitrous oxide emissions from if we add too much nitrogen, nitrous oxide, and that's almost 300 times as capacity of global warming, the same amount of carbon dioxide does. Methane is also emitted from livestock, and that's potential greenhouse gas. We are looking at trying to figure out how we can reduce those emissions as well. So different opportunities with improving feed, improving animal health, and then people are talking about trying to go to different types of food that maybe have less beef and dairy in them. Those are also options, but there are options within the beef and dairy production systems to reduce emissions as well. When we realize that those are important sources of protein and agricultural production.
There's one other question from Anthony in the chat.
How does one improve the soil balance? One of the things that people talk about biology is having living roots in the soil, because those plant roots the microorganisms that are in the and eat the exudates, the of organic material that the roots and nutrients for the microbes. And so providing living roots that are always giving them something to eat is one way to improve the soil biology. Having more residue being retained as well is another way. And you can measure that by soil health tests will help you measure soil biology, looking at mineralizable nitrogen. There are also biological activity and also soil microbe diversity tests you can do to see how active microbes are. The thing with those is that you could measure your microbial activity when it's a nice when your soil is very dry compared to when it's very wet, and it would be quite different. And so you have to make sure that you measure that. If you're comparing two different time periods, you're comparing it at about the same time of the year when the soil is, you know, similar temperature and things like that, or else you're going to think that you could end up with results that say you've dramatically increased your soil biological activity, and you may not have, or vice versa.
So I have a question, and you know, our North Carolina Department of Agriculture lab does not measure nitrogen, and I understand why that reason is, and they do not measure biological activity. And so for, say, a small farmer, perhaps do you have any suggestions for labs that actually do have those tests available for a reasonable fee?
I don't have suggestions for labs, although I think that didn't Dr. Franz Lubers, when he did his presentation, didn't he talk about tests that he does in his lab? And it almost sounded like he might be open to people sending him samples.
Yeah, I need to contact him because I went to his website and I was digging around for that because I had that conversation with someone else today that prompted that very question. And so I just need to reach out to him and find that out, because it was not apparent from their website, but I'll just send him an email, because it did seem like in his presentation that he did have that service available that we could send it.
And yes, indeed, Cornell does have the soil health lab in Cornell and at Cornell, and you can send soil samples to Cornell for assessment. The most important thing is just don't compare yourself to a New York soil. Compare your soil that you've been working on with another soil that you know is maybe not doing as well, or maybe is doing better, but is in your same region. And those are better comparisons. Or from one time period to like 5 years later, how things have improved. But remember, it takes time to improve and to increase soil carbon. The other thing is to like look at all the different things that they test, and not just one number that tries to put it all together into like, this is your soil health score, but look at what the different parts are that make up that soil health score, so that you can see different, they will measure soil carbon and other things as well.
Yeah, teasing out the little parts, because obviously they're giving it a score based on what they created that score to be, like the health score.
Yeah.
So I have, and he say Amanda has, this is on par with the percent principles of soil health.
The 5 principles of soil health.
Oh, that's it. That's what's in there.
Yeah, that's right. And I had those 5 principles at the beginning of the presentation. So, yeah.
Yes, yeah, there are lots of videos on that, and there's many different versions and many people weighing in on soil health, all pretty much saying that basic message be distilled down. Give the microbes something to eat, and they'll make you have a better outcome in general. Be a microbe farmer. I'm going to launch the poll.
ecology professor talked about Pac-Man.
Yeah,
This little guy comes and eats this, and then this one comes and eats him, and all that.
that's right. And you just have there's always a bigger fish. And the aggregates that hang around like give the little bacteria a place to hide away from the nematodes. So
Right.
don't break up the aggregates because they'll die.
Exactly.
Which I always found very fascinating. Pac-Man thing. So I really appreciate your presentation. It was really great.